then you have to make a hard sell as to why you would put like a team like a UCF or a Michigan in the number 4 spot.
Hey, Rick, let's talk about this Oklahoma-Texas game today. I mean, it's, maybe it's horns down. I don't know if you saw that story. That was kind of a joke to see what I did there. With the Sooners, man, I tell you what, Oklahoma, number 5, ready, knocking on the door. This is a must-win for them. But I tell you what, Texas can create some chaos for the college football playoff scenario, as Matt was just talking about. Let's talk a little bit about the Texas Longhorns and the Oklahoma Sooners. We know the committee doesn't want the Big 12 in the playoffs. We say that because that's what they've shown us. They've had time of opportunity year after year after year to have an opportunity where they can have someone from the Big 12 in there, and it never happens. They would much rather see Ohio State than Oklahoma in that scenario. If that is what plays out, let's break it down a little bit deeper. Texas and Oklahoma today.
Well, real quick to get on what Matt was just talking about, and I think it is great. It's a great point by him. It is actually the thing that I am rooting for as well, and we can unpack what he's talking about. That nightmare scenario, what does the committee do if Bama wins, Oklahoma and Ohio State both lose? Does UCF, even without their quarterback Mackenzie Milton, who just went down with a broken leg, do they go ahead and just shut their fan base up and give them a shot, or are we going to see our first ever 2-loss team into the college football playoff if that scenario plays out? I think what Matt just brought up is probably it's the one thing I'm rooting for today. Actually, it should be what the rest of the country should be rooting for. Since our show, we love this college football chaos. That would be the chaos that we would all be looking for today.
Well, yeah, we do love chaos, don't we? Well, let's kind of go through these games. Matthew, we'll get your thoughts real quickly here on number 14 against number 5, Oklahoma. On paper, one would think that Oklahoma could win. But speaking of chaos, Texas can bring it. And then we'll go into some of these other games that we got on tap today as far as the playoff implications go anyway. Texas and Oklahoma, Matthew, what are your thoughts?
I think right now Texas can find a way to put the clamps on Kyler Murray. I think Oklahoma could have a problem in this game. Like I said, their defense has looked horrendous the last several weeks. I mean, you cannot keep giving up 50 points every single game and still find ways to win every single time. And I think eventually it's going to catch up to Oklahoma. It may not. It's tough to beat a team twice during the regular season, and Texas has that deal to deal with. But I think looking ahead to the playoffs, unless Oklahoma can shore up their defense, at least limit teams to, say, in the 20s or 30s, they're going to have a hard time, I think, getting into the championship game in Santa Clara.
Matthew, as we go on into this Alabama game, and we talk about Alabama and Georgia, huge implications going on here, as you mentioned or alluded to earlier. All Notre Dame fans are rooting for is Alabama or a tie to win this game. Keys to the game: Alabama versus Georgia.
Well, obviously Georgia's defense has got to find a way to, put some clamps down on either the rushing attack of Alabama or Tua Tagovailoa's dual threat ability. And then Jake Fromm and the offense is going to have a huge day. I'd say, 300, 400 yards against an Alabama defense that has been rock solid. I think it's going to take a number in that range to give them any chance to get to the number of points necessary to keep up with Alabama. But I think right now the big question is, if it's close, how the game plays out at the start of the second half has been the issue with teams trying to beat Alabama. The Citadel got pasted in the second half after they were tied at the half with Alabama a couple weeks ago. Same scenario happened to Auburn. If Georgia's close, can they survive that early flurry in the second half? If they can, they've got a chance. But if they can't, Alabama, I think, is going to win this game, and they'll win it convincingly.
Rick, obviously Alabama has been a very dominant team. We love to hate Alabama, but you got to give credit to Coach Nick Saban, who's orchestrated probably the most dominated regular season in SEC football. Kirby Smart is a Nick Saban protege, if you will, and certainly they know each other's coaching styles well. How well do you think knowing each other's coaching styles come into play when you try to get in the head of the other coach? It's like, hey, I trained him. I know what he's going to do here. That's what Saban's thinking. And Kirby Smart's thinking, hey, I work for this man. I know this is what he's going to do. I know this is what it's going to do. This is a huge relationship between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a really good point, and I think that plays a huge role in this game, actually, knowing what Alabama can do on defense, obviously, because Kirby Smart was the defensive coordinator there. Then I think the coaching strategies and everything, to me, look pretty similar. So then it comes down to talent on the field, and we see what Alabama's done against LSU, Mississippi State. They don't even let their opponents off the ground early in games. What Georgia needs to do is get some points on the board early. Maybe go toe-to-toe with Alabama in the first half. Trade some points, trade scores, or maybe don't let Tonga Vailoa throw the ball over the yard in the first half, because Alabama is going to come out and try to suffocate Jake Fromm, suffocate that running game against Georgia, and not even let Georgia get off the ground early. Georgia needs to avoid that to have a chance in this game.
And let's not forget, guys, Jake Fromm originally committed to Alabama, a quarterback for Georgia, originally committed to Alabama, so there's that key factor as well. Matthew, when you look at the relationships between Kirby Smart and Nick Saban, of course, as we just mentioned, Jake Fromm was once committed to play at Alabama. This is going to be a knockout, drag-out game. I think a lot of people think that this is going to be probably one of the best games of the season. But there again, if Alabama can figure out a way to do what they've always figured out a way to do, this might be a non-issue. We might just be talking about nothing at this point, but it certainly has all the makings of a great battle today.
Again, it depends on Georgia's performance. I think we know Alabama's going to bring their A game. There's no question about that. Right now, Georgia's defense, and I think for Notre Dame fans, keep in mind they have to go to Athens next year to play the Bulldogs during one of the early parts of the season. So based on the performance of Georgia the next few weeks, it gives you an idea of what Notre Dame may have to deal with when they head to Athens early next year.
Well, they're going to be important on both sides that they win that turnover explosive game, that they both play force turnovers. Obviously, they've got to control that. Rick, how does Georgia and Alabama control that turnover game? I think the person that wins that game very well could win today's contest.
Well, I think with Swift and Holyfield, the running backs for Georgia, is going to dictate a lot of that. They need to get the running game going against Alabama and take some pressure off Jake Fromm and takes him away from making these tight throws and pressure throws. If they can soften up Alabama a little bit up front, and that's a tall task, I think Georgia has a real good shot in this game by getting the running game going.
The other thing right now with Georgia as well is they got to avoid penalties. They cannot afford these, second and long, second and 20s, third and 15s, third and 10s. That's where Alabama's defense goes to town. So I think right now playing a disciplined game also is going to be key for Georgia, especially, avoiding the false starts, the holdings, and all that stuff. They cannot afford to put Jake Fromm in situations where he's got to make a big play or he's going to have to force a throw, because that's where you risk the situation of turnovers, a bad throw, a possible fumble, blindside hit. I mean, there's a lot of things that can go wrong there. So I think a disciplined game also is going to be key if Kirby Smart's boys want to have a chance.
Well, and also one thing to remember about Georgia is that is a very powerful tool they have. They have a very good secondary, and they have a very good scheme. Their players do a really good job of executing and disguising it on the back end. So we'll see. Let's Rick, we're kind of, a lot of times we like to look at last year compared to this year. We look at last year's Georgia compared to this Georgia. I wouldn't say there's a lot of changes. I would say there's a lot of improvement into the game. When you compare last year's Georgia Bulldogs to this year's Georgia Bulldogs, what do you come up with?
Well, I wouldn't say Holyfield and Swift are as dynamic as Sony Michel and Nick Chubb in the running game. That's kind of where they're lacking. But defensively, you're right there. They have a pretty good secondary, and they still have Ridley there on offense. They have playmakers on offense, and receivers can open up and soften up that secondary of Alabama. But Alabama is just so disciplined on defense, and Georgia's going to have to score some points early. They're going to have to. They're going to have to get up off the mat early because, like I said, Bama likes to suffocate these other teams early in games, and Georgia's going to have to avoid that.
Matt, real quickly, let's talk a little bit about the Alabama Crimson Tide. They're a beast. They are a beast, and I know Notre Dame does not want to play them in the playoffs. Notre Dame doesn't want to see them at all. But if Notre Dame wants to hope for a championship, let's face it, the reality might come. Something's going to come to a head between Notre Dame and Alabama meeting. But Alabama has proven time and time again, as much as we love to hate Alabama, they have proven that they could get the job done. Are they going to do anything different than we already know about Alabama?
Could you repeat that for me there? You were breaking up a little bit there for me.
Oh, I'm sorry. I said, do we think that Alabama is going to do anything different than what we've seen Alabama do time and time and time again? And that's just, even if they don't dominate Georgia, they find a way to win. They always find a way to win. Does Alabama, again, find a way to win?
Well, again, I think the situation's influenced on the opponent. Is the opponent going to be, petrified of the situation like we've seen Alabama opponents been recently and throughout this last several years, or are they going to take control of the situation? Because you look back at that LSU game, and LSU got the early jump on them in Death Valley earlier this year, and Georgia never recovered. If that happens again, does Georgia have a recovery strategy to play Alabama? And if you go by the LSU game, where they really struggled despite the fact LSU does not have one of the better quarterbacks in the SEC at Joe Burrows, I think that tells me a lot. If Alabama gets early lead and Georgia falls behind, the big question in my mind is, could Georgia find a way to come back, unlike what happened when they played LSU in Baton Rouge?
Well, we'll certainly see. That question is yet to pertain. Rick, we're going to let you walk us into Championship Saturday. We're going to be talking about the Ohio State Buckeyes and Northwestern, as well as some other games. But as we walk across the board in Championship Saturday, what are the things we're looking at? What are the key points that we're looking at? Obviously, not every game has a playoff contention implication, but certainly there's some good games on tap on Championship Saturday.
Yeah, and we'll just go with this, assuming Alabama is going to beat Georgia today. What you really want to look for is the Oklahoma-Texas game and the Ohio State-Northwestern game. How good Oklahoma is going to look against Texas? Can they avenge that loss? Can they run the score up? Is it going to be a close game? And what the committee would think about a game like that. And then the Alabama-Northwestern game, how that will go. Because I feel Ohio State is probably going to win that game, and I feel like Urban Meyer is going to run the score up in that game, even though Northwestern is pretty solid on defense. I don't think it would be a scenario like last week against Michigan where Ohio State scores 62 points, but I do think Ohio State tries to run the score up on Northwestern just to make it look pretty for the committee when it comes to time to decide for that number 4 spot tomorrow. But that's what you want to look for, is this Ohio State and this Oklahoma game this weekend.
Well, absolutely. I think that's what everybody's looking at. But let's talk. We're going to get into more about the Ohio State game here in just a minute. Matt, I want to talk about Michigan. Michigan totally just fell apart last week. They kicked themselves out of any hope of a playoff prediction. What kind of a bowl do they get to? They're going to a bowl that's obviously. But let's go back to what I've said before. Jim Harbaugh has saved his job maybe for another year, which he did. I'm certain of that. But at the same time, Michigan was nowhere to be found last week, and it showed on the field, and now it shows with a loss.
Well, if Ohio State gets to the playoff, then Michigan's probably going to head to Pasadena to play Washington, the Pac-12 champions of the Rose Bowl. It just depends on what happens in that game. But I think right now, if you're Ohio State, you are keen on stopping Bowser. I think Bowser's had a big game for Northwestern, especially against Notre Dame. He had a big performance on the ground. So if they can put the clamps down on Bowser, Ohio State's defense, and force the passing game to do some damage, Notre Dame did, I think, a lot better job controlling the pass than they did the run in their matchup at Evanston. So I think if they can put the clamps on Bowser, I think there's going to be a very good chance Ohio State wins this game convincingly today.
Rick, what are your thoughts, Ohio State and Northwestern? We're going to get into more deep of that here in just a moment, but what are your thoughts there? And also, what are your thoughts about Michigan just totally collapsing last week?
Yeah, in a way, you kind of saw that coming with Michigan. I mean, I feel like I did anyway, because they were getting hyped up, and their defensive numbers were looking gaudy and with a top defense or top 3 defense in the country, but they're beating up on all the lower end teams here in the Big Ten, and so that's what had everybody fooled, I guess, into thinking they're really a great team. With this